Well, I hope everybody can hear me. Name is George Darling. I've been in the industry actually a little bit more than 30 years. I guess my big experience was working for a huge company called Valet that has operations all over the world. When I left them, I've been working consulting for some of the major consultancies across the world. I just came back from a trip through Europe, Germany, and Spain, and I've had work recently in North America, and then also I've had some experience recently down in Durango and Zacatecas in Mexico. And I would say each geographical area, as far as industry, is quite different. And I'll try and touch that upon that just a little bit going forward. And there's demographic reasons for that. But anyway, I want to show a little bit of what happened with the COVID issue and how we're coming out of the COVID issue. So just if I can manage the slides here, I just need the next slide, please. Yeah, so I think, a lot of changes happened in industry during COVID, and some of them subtle, some of them pretty obvious. I think most of us know as we walked into COVID, we really didn't think much was going to happen. I think we realized in the first 3 or 4 months something major was happening, and I think as we really got into it, we realized there'd be some big shifts going on in the industry. What really hit a lot of industries was first some major financial constraints, especially in the service industry and the hospitality industry. As we know, a lot of that had to shut down for a period of time. A lot of the time there was just insufficient demand for some of the goods. We saw a big shift. I got to talk about real estate. We saw a big shift in that, which is surprising. In other things, and of course, when you're doing these webinars, you've got some background family noise, and I apologize for that a little bit at the moment. Also, there's a lot of fluctuation in consumers' demand. So people were demanding things immediately, and you couldn't supply them immediately. The big issues with that. Cash flow or managing debt was a big issue. All of a sudden, debt started ballooning with a lot of things going forward. Government regulations changed quite a lot to manage us, and we had to worry about that going forward. Some obstacles for business and organizations. Recruiting in the beginning and retaining skilled employees was a big problem, big shift in that direction. Rising costs of inputs, and I'll talk about the shortage of labor force going forward a little bit. Big issue obtaining financing because the big banks were in a bit of a struggle to be able to finance operations. We're just not making a profit anymore. And then we see some of the other things that were going on. But the biggest thing on this slide is you can see that there were some major financial constraints of a lot of industry during the whole COVID period. The main purpose of this graph is see on the y-axis, you can see the size of the workforce, and you can see it by 2017, 2018, 19, and 20. And you can see the big drop in those demographics that happened during that period of time. We talked about during COVID, the great retirement, and we talk about baby boomers. I think we knew it was coming. We knew before COVID that there'd be a lot of retirements going on in the baby boomer generation. COVID just accelerated that. So you can see the levels and how they drop. You can imagine a percentage time along the way. You can see in September of 2020, there was a reaction to try and maintain hiring going forward, but it was still well below the levels of the workforce, and well below the levels of previous years. In overall gross domestic product, working through those pre-lockdown period, first wave lockdown restricted, you can see the drops that happened there. You can see the big drop in April of 20 with GNP, and again, just through the production of goods and things and services. Especially was very strong in Europe, because Europe experienced a lot deeper lockdowns than a lot of North America. Yeah, again, looking at labor productivity, and they used an index of 100 in 2018. You can see the productivity drop-offs during the period of COVID, pre-lockdown, first wave, restricted, and second wave. We never got back to the productivity that was experienced before, and I'm anxious to see the continuation of this graph into the year 2021 and 22, just to see whether it's caught up a little bit. I doubt it. I think we're still into a labor productivity issue going forward. Now the reaction to this, the reaction to all of this is very interesting. A lot of companies, especially for a while, I worked in the big royalty streaming business, and it didn't affect them at all. So there were no changes that were made, and for about 35% of heavy industry, they didn't have to make any changes. But other industries had to find new ways of interactors to sell to customers. 22% of them. That probably, and Corinne mentioned it, a lot more IT. A lot more, of course, we're all on Zoom meetings. We're trying to handle Zoom and react with customers. In some ways, there was that big learning that we could react with customers in some way a little bit better, because we had the direct conversation with them over Zoom or GoToMeeting and that type of thing. I was dealing with a big project overseas, and because it couldn't travel anymore, it actually cut down our travel budget. But I noticed we were able to react in some ways a little bit better. Dealing in a virtual world, and there you go to the next third line there, the increased use of virtual connections. I think pre-COVID, we're all wondering about working outside the office and whether there'd be any merit in that. COVID really first forced us to learn how to work virtually, and probably one of the biggest benefits of COVID is that virtual work. Not to say that we still need the people interaction, but it just taught us that there was an alternative way of dealing with customers. Increased maintenance cost, certainly in IT, certainly in maintaining people in their home environment. Another reaction was a lot of closures that went on, closed temporarily, especially in some of the service industries along the way. A lot of other adaptations made along the way. A lot of voluntary closed temporarily. Again, I mentioned about e-commerce starting to move more to, I suspect that Bitcoin kind of did a little bit better during that period of time because it eliminated some of the blockchain issues along the way. Different methods of production, a lot of discontinuous services altogether, and a lot of canceled contracts happened along the way. Some mergers or acquisitions, especially in the intermediate industries, realizing the only way to survive was to merge. In my particular industry, which is the mining industry, we saw some major mergers that went on. Eagle, Buttout, Lakeshore, a lot of mergers and acquisitions went on during that period of time. And you can see some of the other smaller effects along the way. Of course, human resources. And a big shift in human resources, a lot of people working from home, trying to work in big industry, working from home. And of course, you have the family situation. So again, about 29%, it wasn't really applicable. They were flexible enough in the schedule to be able to work from home. There's a lot of issues with childcare and child care facilities, and that had to be adapted to a little bit. A lot of companies had to figure out ways of adapting the family unit and working with that. Sometimes meetings would be had a little bit earlier, run a little bit later, nothing in the middle, being apt to that. Allowing people to work remotely. Again, companies were forced into allowing people to work remotely. I think coming out of COVID is interesting how industry's handling that. Recognizing retention. So if you're going to tell everybody that they have to come back in the office and work Monday to Friday, worried about retention, a lot of companies are saying we would like you to work 3 days out of the 5 back in the office. That seems to be a module that I've seen in industry going forward. Changing of schedules, different ways of leave of absence, that type of thing. Anyway, there's had to have been all these changes in industry that were forced upon us during COVID to be able to adapt to what's going on. Just next slide. Yeah, especially working from home. So you can see what happened here. Prior to February 20, you can see the percentage of people working from home. You can see what happened during COVID, 2020, May. up and down. August was probably the peak due to the lockdowns and people adapting, working from home. And you can see where we're standing now, almost, from 12.6% up to 29, almost, a 50% increase of people still working from home. There are some big companies I know that have actually canceled their office contracts and have all their teams continue to work from home. There's a big group here, Verify, that does a lot of work in virtual space. They decided they can have everybody working from home and giving up their office space. And you notice as an adjunction to that, you notice in big cities now, downtown, the office occupancy is quite low, and cities are learning to try and adapt to the low occupancy at the moment. Just another sidebar to the whole thing. Declining inventory, the real reason for all of this is that because of the supply chain, we've had to really look at our inventories, and inventories are probably an issue for big companies, and we've had to really get into lowering our inventories. And I'm just on another big project up in Northern Ontario, and really stretching the supply chain, and we've got to look at the inventories. An example, Schneider Electric, who provide huge MCCs, we've had to really look at all their inventories and be able to clean them out for projects going forward. So I have a lot to lower inventories, which in a way is a good thing because inventories are an expensive part of the operation. Yeah, and where are the big delays, especially supplier delays, and on the manufacturing side. But in the supply chain, one link is always the weakest link, and in the manufacturing, and we find that the link is again related to human resources. I'll look at the pulp and paper industry, especially in this part of the world. All our rivers and holding areas are full of logs, and they're all before the sawmills. The sawmills, the problem is the workforce in the actual sawmill. The link after the sawmills, the actual transportation of lumber to the world is not an issue. It's that particular human resources manning up the sawmills. And if anybody's tried to build anything recently, especially heavy construction, the price of materials obviously gone through the roof, fueling and inflation's another conversation. But the link is that human person actually manning a particular part of the sawmill. Same as construction, retail, trade, all the way through. You can see the figures here at the moment. But manufacturing is the biggest issue, especially with the human resourcing. Yes. Okay, I do want to talk about one other thing, and that is the differences. I haven't had this slide here. Is the differences between Europe, the differences between North America, and the differences between South America. My recent travels through Europe. What happened before COVID is, as you remember, there was huge migrations to Europe, immigrants coming out of, like, for example, Libya, Morocco, Algeria, moving into Europe. You heard about the problems with that. But the corollary was that they had a big human resource force to be able to train up to start manning some of the situations. So I know it's traveling through Europe, especially in airplanes, is not an issue. No issue with traffic controllers, baggage, all the rest of it, because they had a big labor force to draw upon. Industries, as far as human resourcing in Europe, Germany, don't have trouble with human resources. They have a bit of an issue with training up to the particular job. Of course, the big issue in Europe right now, and as an adjunct, is the Ukrainian war and the cost of energy. I'm dealing with an operation in northern Spain. Their energy costs have doubled. Their vendor cost for supplies of materials has doubled. But the prices, the selling, for example, of gold, of copper, and the rest of it, the prices haven't changed. So the cost of sales has increased greatly. The revenue derived is not. So we're in trouble with one operation I'm dealing with, where we're going to have to cut considerable out of the budget to be able to survive, just because of that issue with inflation. So Europe has not had an issue with really human resourcing. It's had more an issue with the current inflation. North America, our problem really is human resource. I mentioned we had the Great Retirement. Problem with manufacturing is being able to adapt to maybe 30% of their workforce being available at the moment. I noticed in South America, the problem is more political, and the slowdown there has been towards the government, especially in Peru and Argentina, changing to be more leftist a little bit. They're going through their issues politically. So, South America is political, North America is human resources, and Europe is certainly the high cost of energy relative to the cost of sales. A lot of challenges. I do notice, though, the adaptation, especially I was in a meeting about 2 hours ago with a big project that we have, and the level of detail that people are getting into now, especially the supply chain, and really talking about looking ahead, 3 or 4 months as far as deliverables through vendors is taking a lot more of the conversation. We're not taking for granted something being delivered. 3 months from now, we're actually getting into the vendors and talking to them seriously about, are these deliveries real or not? So a lot more detail, a lot more hard work at that type of thing. Challenges, yes, lots of challenges going forward. The world will not be the same as it was in the past. Industry's learning how to adapt and adapt in detail. And it'll be interesting to see some of these graphs over the next 2 or 3 years. Okay, thank you very, very much.